welcome to MD Media's weekly show, The H Panel. Today we'll be talking about Tigray, 1 year after the Pretoria Agreement, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll be talking about what had happened and what was written in the agreement and how it played out over the past 12 months. November 2nd was the signing of the Pretoria Agreement last year, and I have Isaias Hailemariam, Brooke Redda, and Taklai Mikael joining me today from Sweden after midnight. Taklai, thank you for making that as usual. I'm from the West Coast, Isaias, and from the East Coast, Brooke Redda. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Great. So we will deal with this important topic from the Tigray perspective, but let's start with the usual first segment, opening segment of the show, that is the highlight of the week. Let's start with Brooke. Brooke, what is the highlight for you over the past 7 days?
It's not a whole lot. Mainly, I was really focused on the internal affairs of Tigray, specifically in our internal politics more than the Ethiopian political dynamics. But it seems to me, if I'm not mistaken, the boiling point about the Red Sea was kind of died down, and there seems to be kind of congratulatory part in the Ethiopian government about its military achievement. They're trying to bolster their military morale, and still they seems to be fixated on the Northern Command attack narrative, even though it was completely debunked by their own late Abra Adamu. He clearly outlined how they were preparing all along for this premeditated war. It wasn't the Northern Command attack that triggered the whole thing. So it was kind of quiet on my side, but just like I said, I didn't give it its due attention, so probably I could be mistaken here. But nothing really popped out for me from what was previously in the couple of weeks that was going on. The Eritrean government rhetoric, the Ethiopian government rallying people to together for common cause, kind of like the Red Sea situation. But nothing really. I mean, the war with the Hamara region is protracted. I don't see it's ending anytime soon. So it's kind of normal for me. So that's really my assessment. Thanks.
Thank you, Baruch. Taklai, what about you? How do you see the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, over the past 7 days?
Well, I always like to start by mentioning something that is not an event in some sense, which is that the people in IDP centers in Mekelle and in a lot of other places in Tigray haven't yet returned. And when people speak about highlights or events, it's easy to forget that is because it's not an event. But that is a fact of life in Tigray, and I think it's always good to mention that. So in some sense, it's not a highlight, it's not an event that happened past week, but it is a reality that remains a fact of life for people in Tigray. So I would like to mention that first. The other is, you mentioned, Getachew, in introduction, yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, was the first year anniversary of the signing of the Pretoria Agreement, such as it was, and many actors have reflected on it in various ways. The Ethiopian regime, as Brooke said, of course, it was in celebratory mood for them. They are trying to push the completely false and now debunked narrative that the war started because Tigray forces supposedly attacked their bases, but that didn't happen. That was a lie. That was a lie that they used to galvanize people, and everybody has woken up to that. Even the people who were supporting them last 2 years have now, they find it embarrassing to say that. So I think people are coming around to the reality, but nonetheless, the Ethiopian regime is still pushing that narrative. And the Tigray government and the Tigray actually, to their credit, the TPLF and the Tigray interim administration, although they seem to be, the divide seems to be widening, but the way they commemorated, it was sort of, they seem to be following the same line. And the US also issued a statement about the anniversary, and they say that a lot of things have been implemented following the agreement. Of course, they are more what is the word? They tend to say that a lot has been implemented when in fact a lot remains unimplemented. And they mentioned the formation of the interim government as a huge success. They say that this resumption of humanitarian supplies as a huge success, although humanitarian supply has been suspended because of the aid diversion. And they, in a very, very bizarre development, the US didn't mention Western Tigray for the first time now. They used to say that Amhara forces must withdraw from Western Tigray, but in the statement that they issued yesterday, they didn't say that, but they said that Eritrean forces should withdraw. So that is a subtle change in rhetoric from the US. And also a group of 10 European countries issued a statement along the same lines. And what the other highlight is in a way, is not interesting, but the divide among the TPLF and the Tigray interim governments seemed to be intensified for the last couple of days. It had also subsided, but there was some sort of to and from. The TPLF wanted to conduct a meeting for its cadres, and the interim government stood on the way. So there was a lot of interesting developments there, and anything could happen in that respect. And I think that is one event. And in terms of Ethiopia broadly, I think Brooke mentioned about the discourse for the port access. It had subsided for a couple of days. Although today, I randomly tuned in, as I often do, to check what their conversation in Addis Ababa is, and they were talking about the legal routes and possibilities for securing port access. So it hasn't completely disappeared, but I think they seem to have realized, or by they, I mean the Abiy Ahmed regime seemed to have realized that it was a miscalculation the way he made that presentation. And I think those would be the highlights from my perspective.
Great, thank you, Taglay. For our viewers who are interested on what has been happening in Tigray in terms of the TPLF and the IRA, you can follow our H panel from last week, which was covered well. Isaias, welcome again. Thank you for joining us. You will also kickstart our show today in terms of the main topic, but what are the things that stood out for you over the past 7 days?
Thank you very much again, Dr. Getachew, for the invitation. So what stood out for me, there are, I think, 3 things, but I think almost all of them have been discussed earlier. But I think the first one is obviously the Pretoria 1-year anniversary. So it's been a year, of course, since the signing of the agreement. Tigray almost complied with most of the terms and conditions of the agreement, from disarmament to formation of the interim administration and anything in between. However, the federal government, did very little, or almost nothing. Basically, they got 100% of what they wanted from the Pretoria deal, but they have not offered almost anything. I mean, except the fact that there's no active fighting in Tigray. But I mean, virtually everything has not been completed, has not been fulfilled from Tigray side. So, which, I mean, I'll be discussing that a little bit in detail. But I think one of the issue is the Pretoria deal. Second, like Taglay mentioned, the TPLF divide, or I prefer to call it the internal power struggle, in terms of how it devalues Tigray's status as a buffer zone, or in Tigrinya, Mangowi Zoba, because apparently there's war between the Amhara state, the federal government, and other political groups, but Tigray is, I think, more or less, Tigray is neutral technically in terms of militarily, even politically, if you will. I mean, of course, Tigray has, I mean, the leadership is working closely with the Abiy administration. So, but I think at least militarily, we're not actively involved in with any group. So I think that can be translated into benefit. Like, we can use that to our advantage. I mean, because we're comparatively we're a neutral buffer zone at this point. So we could have used, if we have very mature politicians, leaders, they can use that opportunity actually to grab being a buffer zone at this point. So I think the political divide between the different factions of TPLF, the internal power struggle, I think that undermines our effort actually, what we're doing here in the diaspora, and also they neglect the populace or the civilian population, because when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled, right? Trampled, as they say. So that at the end of the day, when they're fighting for power, that's the people, the civilians are suffering a lot. So I think that's the second that stood out for me this week. And third, like you guys have mentioned earlier, Abiy's demand for access to the sea or port is the third. And I think I see that in terms of its implication on Tigray. Can Abiy be trusted if if war between Ethiopia and Eritrea erupts? So can we trust Abiy at all? Can we be protected? So I think I have a very huge concern if there's war, because Tigray is immediately closely Tigray borders Eritrea, obviously. So if there's war, Tigray will be war zone, obviously. So I think this is something we should be concerned about. I think these are the three things that stood out for me this week.
Great. Thank you, Isu, for that. So let's go to the main topic. So we talked about the Pretoria Agreement, and this is the signed version, if you will, signed by from TPLF, Getachew Reda, who was the head of the delegation, and Redwan Hussein from the federal government of Ethiopia, and by the guarantors of this agreement. So this is a 15 articles are included, including the first part, and it's around 9 pages, I guess 9 pages here. So one thing, I mean, given this is signed November 2nd, 2022, and maybe a background to that for our viewers, this is where Eritrean forces were heavily pounding over this town of Adigrat, that is around, I guess, I believe around 90 kilometers north of Maqala, and Eritrean, Amhara, and other forces were attacking as well, targeting Maqala. So for the first 6 days of the Pretoria talk, there was no progress made, according to sources who were part of this negotiation, because Addis Ababa was waiting for a victory to be declared and then make this talk relevant. So from Pretoria, all ears, if you will, were on what's happening in Tigray at that time. Then on November 2nd, there was a joint statement, a 2-page joint statement, and this agreement came a few days later. So 1 year after that, I think the right question to ask is what has been achieved in terms of the provisions of this agreement, anything that you can give in terms of background as well. And our viewers, Isaias has written an op-ed, an additional standard that was published a couple of days ago. Let me just see if I can share it here. So Isaias, can you walk us through, given that your background, you're a student of law as well, what meant for you in terms of the provisions, the way the agreement was signed, most importantly, how we assess the performance, if you will, of the agreement over the past 12 months?
Thank you again, Dr. Getachew. So I think it's been 1 year. So I think, well, what the Pretoria Agreement achieved is, first and foremost, bullet. There's no bullet active war. even though there are still conflicts somewhere in some areas of Tigray. But I think there's no active war. I think that's one of the achievements probably. But I think after that, I mean, like 40% of the land. I think you shared this content. I saw that data yesterday. 40% of Tigray land is still occupied by foreign forces, and 18%, 18% of Tigray population is still under enemy. They're suffering. There's no reconstruction of Tigray has not yet started, and accountability is dead, obviously, because once we signed the Pretoria Agreement, Article 10, it provides, it says that the investigation and adjudication of the atrocity crimes should be handled through the transitional justice system, which is which is the Ethiopian system. Obviously, the investigation and adjudication, everything has to be conducted through that transitional justice system, which is not impartial, incompetent, and an institution politically charged. So basically, we failed in terms of accountability. So we can't hold the criminals accountable. So this is the third major failure of the agreement, and also even Eritreans are still in some part of Tigray. So overall, I think it's a failure, even though there are good things about the Pretoria Agreement. So considering that, it's been a year. Again, like I said earlier in the beginning, Tigray fulfilled almost each and every precondition fulfilled. For example, the DDR, disarmament and reintegration. The DDR process is being almost completed. I mean, technically, and Tigray formed an interim regional administration as per the Pretoria Agreement. And third, the Tigray administration is working closely with the federal government, and the federal government has authority in Tigray. They have a foot in Tigray, basically. So most of the demands from the federal government side have been fulfilled. However, again, they failed to fulfill their obligation in terms of the agreement, including a restoration of Tigray lands and obviously the accountability. They have not even started even the transitional justice process has not started yet. Again, so overall, from Tigray side, it's a failure. So what we should do, I think, in the article, what I was trying to highlight is that there was contract. So this contract was breached because both parties were supposed to fulfill their obligations, but again, the federal has not. So that triggers something. Like if contract is breached, basically, it triggers an opportunity or an avenue to renegotiate. Or from Tigray side, we can demand amendment of some of the provisions, including Article 10, which deals with accountability. And again, second, since we're a buffer zone at this point, so I think we can also use that opportunity to demand, to put some preconditions in the agreements. You have to do this, and I'll do that. So things like that. So, I mean, from Tigray side, I haven't seen that so far. Maybe the politicians are not. I think maybe they don't have any motive. I guess they don't have any motive to deal with that. Maybe they're just, working for, not working with, but for working for Abiy, I guess. So this is my reflection in terms of the article that I wrote 2 days ago, and the Pretoria deal failures.
Great, thank you, Isaias. I just want to throw one question for you, but you can come back later after Tafla and Brooke reflected. You mentioned about maybe renegotiating or some form of amendment, but party to this agreement is the TPLF, as we know. And the TPLF, as we know right now, is delegitimized, if you will, or based on the action taken by the election board. It's not even a political party. So how would you do that, in terms of your recommendation? I think it's good
Yeah.
if you reflect that on that later on.
Yeah.
Let me go back to Taklai now. In the opening segment, you're talking about the different press releases from Magala to Addis, including the NDF, and from Brussels, I guess, and Washington, all these actors, actually a number of countries as well coming together, including Canada, issuing this statement. So again, your take on how the Pretoria Agreement performed in terms of Tigray, or if you will, you can expand on the other parties as well. But how do you compare and contrast with how each of these capitals, the international community, is reading this agreement and its performance vis-a-vis what we see on the ground in Tigray? Tarlai.
Well, if I may get at you, if I could start saying a few words about the agreement itself. I know that each one of us has very, very strong opinions about the agreement, whether it should have been signed, the merits of it, the demerits of it. There are a lot of views, strong views. But without going into any details, I think one thing that is very, very important to point out now is that regardless of how good it is for Tigray, the agreement, it was good that it was signed, because as we now know, the situation then for Tigray was extremely unsustainable because of the siege, because of the lack of weaponry. I think that the damage that would have been unleashed on Tigray was going to be extremely unprecedented. So it was good that it was signed. And also, if you read the profiles of the martyred, you could see that most of the combatants from Tigray side were killed on the days preceding the agreement. It was a huge amount of casualties. So you could see that the situation was extremely difficult for Tigray. And for that reason alone, I think it was good that it was signed. Now, we could debate about whether or not we could have secured a better deal, with the Tigray negotiators should have been prepared more, whether Tigray should have sent better negotiators. But a lot of things to be debated there. But on balance, it was good that it was signed. And I think that is about the only thing that it could, the only positive thing that I could say about the agreement. And of course, the negative aspects of the agreement. First of all, the concession from the Tigray side is extraordinary. For the first time, the Tigray government accepted that it would be accountable to the Ethiopian regime rather than to the Tigray people. It's extraordinary concession to make for a people who prides themselves on being autonomous and on having fought for liberation and all that. It's extraordinary concession to have made. And some of the terms in the agreement. So, for instance, the term concurrent withdrawal of Eritrean and non-NDF forces. It was never defined what concurrent means. Who withdraws first? Do the Amhara and the Eritreans withdraw first before the Tigrayans disarm, or the other way around? It was never defined. But actually, in the way that things panned out, the Tigray forces disarmed, but the Eritreans have never left, and the Amhara have never left. But reading the agreement, you wouldn't know that this is how things were going to unfold. So it was ambiguous, but I think by design from Abiy's side, at the very least. And the other term in the agreement is disputed territories were going to be resolved following the constitution. And it's never defined what they meant by disputed. Is everything that the Amharas claim disputed by that very fact? Or is there any other definition? Because the Amharas do claim a lot of territories in Tigray, still even territories that they didn't occupy then. Would that disputed or would that not disputed? It's never defined. And even if it was defined, they didn't explain what it means to resolve those areas using the constitution. Because using the constitution, one possible interpretation would be that they should withdraw first, and then you follow the constitution to adjudicate if there are any claims from the Amhara side. That would be one plausible interpretation, right? Another one would be that they continue occupying what they have occupied, and if Tigray has any claims or any complaints, it goes into following the constitution. That is another completely different, radically different interpretation. But reading the agreement, you wouldn't know which it is. And then the task of overseeing the implementation was given to the African Union. And the African Union, as everybody knows, is on Abiy's side. And at any rate, even if it was partial, it doesn't have any teeth. No, it's not able to enforce anything. And as we now know, actually, they have tried to go into some areas, for instance, in Western Tigray, but the Eritreans wouldn't allow them. And the African Union didn't have any mechanism to enforce that, to tell Eritrea you can't do this. So the fact that the implementation was tasked to the African Union was a joke. Number one, because the African Union is on Abiy's side, it's an extension of the Ethiopian regime. And number two, even if in a very hypothetical situation where it was impartial, it wouldn't have the mechanism to be able to enforce in the face of an extremely stubborn and recalcitrant Eritrean regime. And one of the assumptions, sort of implied assumption in the agreement, is that Abiy is a good faith actor in the whole thing. But Abiy is not a good faith actor. And I think Hermes mentioned it even in the article as well, because the reason Abiy was forced into signing the agreement was because he wasn't able to finish off the TPLF within the 10 days. And it was very deliberately protracted. Abiy kept pushing the days because the thinking from Abiy's side was that by the time they signed the agreement, the war would have been finished. That was thinking. And that didn't happen. And the reason he signed the agreement was because he wasn't able to finish the war. And because his intention has always been to eliminate the TPLF and to weaken Tigray, he has resorted into a completely different kind of war. But that is not the assumption that they make in the agreement. The assumption is that both the TPLF and the Abiy regime are good faith players, but that's not the case. And it's completely different assumptions. And we are now seeing the results. I think it's because I don't want to take time. I have a lot of other points, but maybe I will come to them in the next round.
Great, thank you, Taglai, for pointing all that. Brooke, I just want to follow on what where maybe Taglai left off in terms of the topic we have, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, in your view, what is the bad? What is the good? What is the ugly? In terms of both the content of the agreement and also in terms of how it was implemented or not.
Okay, thank you. So right from the beginning, the agreement was a very flawed agreement, but it might be a necessary agreement. One thing we have to understand, the Tigrayan forces and the Abiy regime signed into the agreement because both of them know that continuing with the war is untenable. Abiy took, just like the Taglai said before, he took as much time as possible thinking he's going to finish it off, and he couldn't. Because he couldn't, he get into the agreement. It wasn't out of benevolence for Tigray. And the Tigrayan negotiators must have known that we, outsiders, as regular citizens, didn't know the amount of casualty that's going to happen. So it was more or less a chicken game, and somebody has to actually blink, and that happens to be Tigray government. But the very interesting thing, if you guys remember what Uhuru Kenyatta said in the signing agreement, signing is the easiest part. The devil is in the details. So the implementation was going to be a lot more complicated. And the unfairness of it all, if the ugly, because you asked me, the ugly is that for the first time, at least as far as I know, I read a little history, I might not be the expert, a humanitarian aid was used as a political bargaining chip to arm twist a political concession. Never. We've seen in Ukraine, right now we've seen in the Palestine and Israeli war, humanitarian aid always, there's a way to find humanitarian aid for the people who are in the war zone. Tigray, on the other hand, its own government, because as long as Tigray is under Ethiopia, the Tigrayan people are the citizens of Ethiopia, were starving to death, and that was used by the concession of UN, EU, America, African Union to basically arm twist the Tigrayan government into submission by using humanitarian aid as a bargaining chip. That was actually the lowest point. The other thing, as far as the justice system, giving it to the EU is a joke, even as far as maybe it was a couple of days ago, that the EU released a press statement saying that the Pretoria Agreement is progressing very well, even though 10 other country embassies in Addis Ababa actually said there is a lot to be desired. So right from the beginning, the African Union was not an impartial negotiating partner. In fact, they was doing everything they can for the Abiy regime to finish the Tigrayan force off and do whatever it wants to do. So that's the issue. The other thing is the disarmament came before the humanitarian aid. If you see, the disarmament was actually clearly defined how it's going to be implemented, like timeline-wise. The lightweight arms, the heavyweight arms, how it's going to be was very outlined in schedule, whereas the humanitarian aid that was supposed not to be part of the negotiation was in vague terms. If the situation permits, if there's a lot of if in the humanitarian aid as it is. So we were right from the beginning, Tigray was in a very disadvantaged situation. So the good is that our people who were supposed to be dying by bullet, some of them may be saved. But the hunger and the disease and the lack of infrastructure was happening then, is still happening now. So Tigrayan lives are not really, so we're dealing here with numbers, right? If maybe a lot of people would have died due to the drones and the rockets and the missiles and all that stuff. Now people are dying due to hunger, malnutrition, disease. At least, but we can also argue that when the drones were flying over, when the jets were flying over, at least people used to understand our pain. There was a lot of shouting, but now each death is actually a silent death. Nobody really knows how many people are dying right at their home due to hunger or disease. So that's also the other ugly part of it, that our pain, our suffering is not being broadcasted, if you will. The Tigrayan government did everything it can, including dissoluting its own party, canceling the people's will, because whether we like it or not, TPLF was actually elected. That election was actually dissolved and act voided. Earlier you mentioned, actually, if I may answer a little bit, earlier you mentioned about Isaias, can TPLF be a negotiating party because TPLF is now delegitimized? But at that time, TPLF was not only delegitimized, it was also deemed terrorist. So if a year ago, the delegitimized and terrorist TPLF was, okay for negotiation, I don't see why it's now, because the situation is a lot better. It's not completely favorable, but at least it's not a terrorist. So that question can be looked at in a more positive way. I mean, the TPLF situation is a little bit elevated right now. Now, if a negotiation happens to be, which I doubt it might, because things are a little murky right now, would TPLF be part of the negotiation or the interim government? That's debatable. I don't know what's going to be. The bad thing is the complete deflation of the Tigrayan government. We, as a Tegaru, are demanding our government to be more active in Akri, for example. With all the disadvantage that we have, at least the international humanitarian for I don't want to botch the acronym, but International Commission for Human Rights Experts in Ethiopia, even though it has a lot of obstacles to do its work, at least there was a glimmer of hope that it's going to go there and deliver an independent report. That one is completely now more or less stopped. So who is going to investigate what happened and bring it to the international transitional justice system that is led by African Union, which completely has no enforcement? It was never part. it was never in a position to do this kind of negotiating action and also enforcing when things do not go that way. The Ethiopian government pretty much has all the upper hand. The Tigray doesn't. Even then, we fulfill every achievement, every demand that was actually laid upon us, and then we get pretty much nothing. The only thing we get right now is a very mediocre services. I mean, yes, electricity, internet, and phone are open to a certain extent. The in and out of Tigray through the airlines, Ethiopian Airlines, is a little bit questionable, but people are getting in and out to a certain extent. But by and large, still Tigray is under siege. There is no aid flowing. People are suffering. Our government, even if they don't have means of enforcing the agreement, what we would have expected, I expected from Tigrayan government to be actually a little more vocal. You don't necessarily are gonna force people if you don't have power, but at least you cannot allow your truths, your justice to be silenced, and that's what's happening really with the interim government, with the TPLF in general. They are more interested in their own internal political bickering instead of addressing our people's issue. As far as the Americans, the EUs, they are giving lip service, but look at how things actually degraded from Anthony Blinken saying that there is ethnic cleansing happening in Western Tigray to Western Tigray should be returned to its prior status quo, now completely unmentioned. It's really a downward spiral that we're going through. And I read Isaiah's article and it hit me. Okay, so if we decide to renegotiate, what is the recourse? To be honest, we are dealing with the same actors that put us in this untenable situation in the first place. And the sad part is that when we try to reopen the case, we're going to go to the same deaf ear and blind eyes. And I don't really honestly know what we're going to do. To be sure, Ethiopia had its own other dealings, the war with Amhara and the back and forth bantering. I don't know if it's serious or not with Eritrea. But at this point, if Abiy is not fulfilling his end of the bargain, nobody is actually forcing it to. The sanctions are almost pointless at this point. He's getting some aids and some diplomatic cooperation. So it's really disheartening. But what I would like to see from our Tigrayan civic organizations, opposition political party, the interim government, and Tigrayan activists even, we have to actually shout for the justice. We cannot allow the truth to be buried. Maybe we're going to get our justice at some point, but we cannot be part of the silence clique that's happening around us. Thank you, Getachew.
Great. Thank you, bro, for that. So maybe I'd say it's good to have enough time to detail what are the way out. So Isaiah, the question I asked you before, that Brooke touched upon as well. Who would be doing that? Given two things. One, the internal dynamics all of you mentioned in Magala. There was actually a talk, a 10-part interview I did with Mulugeta Gabrehot, aka Chaltu, Mulugeta Chaltu. And one thing that was a highlight for me among a number of points was how Ethio-Eritrean, after the Ethio-Eritrea war in 1998 and 2000, how at that time, if you remember, there was again within the TPLF there was this major I don't know if you're infighting, and how the leadership was not paying attention to what was happening at the international forum in terms of the Badme issue and so on. On the late CU Mesfin, came to media and said that Badme was decided to Ethiopia. He meant it, that he was not, making just lying, because according to Mulugeta, they gave the file to a junior diplomat at the foreign office. So the point of this is, Isaias, do you see Maqala not paying attention enough for one reason or another to this ACRI and Pretoria Agreement and so on, versus what Addis Ababa is doing in terms of well-informed and keeping its interest at the center of everything? Isaias.
Thank you again. So before I dive into the Ma'ala versus Addis, I think some of your participants are asking questions. So I read Betty. TPLF doesn't have any legal status. I think Brooke and some other folks also mentioned about TPLF status versus signing the agreement. I think this is very important to discuss because TPLF didn't have a legal status before signing off the agreement, I believe. The Ethiopian Election Board outlawed the TPLF already. And after signing the agreement, I think TPLF was removed from the terrorist list, I think in March 2023. It's very recently. So when they signed the agreement, actually they were terrorists in the terrorist list, basically. I'm not endorsing the opinion, but that's what the Abiy administration believes. So, but in that case, in contracts, if you don't have legal status, so whatever you signed is void. It's void, basically. So technically, which translates to there was not valid agreement in technical terms. But I'm not saying we don't have to sign the agreement. I'm glad we signed it anyways. But at least it stopped the war, active war. So, but technically, there was no legal status from TPLF side. Anyways, I agree. So, what does that mean? So, in terms of who will take over that? For example, if we have to renegotiate or amend the agreement or even sign another agreement, what happened if TPLF continues to not have legal status? I think in that case, the people of Tigray, all inclusive organizations, civic societies, and political groups can succeed. They can succeed or take over succession. Basically, you can succeed contracts. Contracts can be inherited. Like basically, you can take over because TPLF signed it on behalf of the people of Tigray, right? So the people of Tigray can renegotiate or do whatever is good for Tigray, basically. So TPLF not having legal status or being or not being in a terrorist list doesn't really matter because the people of Tigray can intervene and do what's best for Tigray, I guess. And that being said, I think Betty also asked a very important question: how can you have an agreement without an enforcement in the first place? That's very interesting. I agree. So I think enforcement. In some articles in the past, actually, also in one forum, we were talking about this. So one of the weaknesses of the Pretoria Peace Agreement is that there's no enforcement provision. Actually, it doesn't say anything about enforcement. It's just a contract. You do this, I will do that, but it doesn't say there's no precondition. So when you sign treaty agreements like this, so there has to be enforcement mechanism, preconditions. If you don't fulfill that, there's sanction. There's economic, political sanction, or diplomatic sanction, right? So there's nothing. So which means if you fail to do that, if you don't fulfill, there's nothing against you, basically. So there's no clear provision, like even articles. There's no word about enforcement mechanism. I think one of the reasons why amendment, I agree, Baruch, your frustration, you're right, because we're signing the agreement with same person, same mentality, same agenda. So you don't expect a lot. I totally agree. That's very, your frustration is very legit. However, I think if there's an opportunity, if we can renegotiate or amend some of the provisions, there are a lot of things we can do. For example, we can include enforcement provisions. So, for example, if I don't do this and this in such and such time, I will be responsible to do in such and such, and then the enforcement comes. The enforcement can be monitored through international organizations, countries, non-state actors. So, there are options. There are options to make sure the terms and conditions of the agreement are respected or honored, and also we can also put preconditions. Like I said, non-compliance may entail this and this. For example, if Tigray territories are not returned to Tigray in 8 months, 5 months, 4 months, or if the Eritrean forces are not fully withdrawn, the Ethiopian government may, agreed to fulfill, some preconditions. So we can incorporate such provisions if there is an opportunity to renegotiate and amend some of these provisions. Again, when it comes to enforcement, I think I have to mention African Union. I know my colleagues have already discussed about AU and the African Union. My least favorite institution, and there's a reason. So the African Union, historically, it's an institution to protect systems, regimes, not people, actually. The African Union, once the European colonizers left Africa, the African Union was established, and its main goal was to protect, it's been protecting regimes, actually, like the political dictators and political figures, not the people. The African Union never cared about the African people, actually. Like, you can take, for example, when genocide happened in Rwanda, the African Union was there, right? When Somalia was completely destroyed, the African Union was there. Libya, Congo, even recently Sudan, right? So they didn't care about people were suffering. A lot of things happened. The worst form of crime happened in Ethiopia and in Africa. The African Union didn't do anything at all. Even when it comes to like accountability, for example, al-Bashir, the International Criminal Court was chasing to arrest al-Bashir. All the African leaders, the dictators, were shocked. They were afraid because tomorrow it could be one of them, right? So they were scared. They were protecting al-Bashir. So you see, imagine al-Bashir committed crime according to the ICC. Of course, it's very controversial, but in principle, I think he committed some crime. And when he was chased, the African Union with the gatekeeper, they were trying to protect him. They refused. Even leaders, Ethiopian leaders, for example, Mullis was, try to support al-Bashir, and many African leaders were standing along al-Bashir. Ultimately, ICC, captured him anyways. So what I'm trying to say is the African Union with the broker, one of the Pretoria Agreement brokers was the African Union. The African Union was not independent. Even historically, as I mentioned, historically, it never stood along with the people. It's all about protecting regimes. So I don't trust the African Union to be part of this process. Even when the genocide happened against Tigrayans, I said this multiple times in different forums, the chairperson of the African Union, Musa Faki, who lives in Addis, in the capital of Ethiopia, just a few kilometers from where he lived, many Tigrayans, thousands of Tigrayans, in Hanna Mariam, Zuai, and Awash Sabat, Awash Arba, all these places, many Tigrayans were detained, tortured, raped, and their property confiscated without court order. So when all this happened, the Musa Faki, the chairperson of the African Union, he lived in Addis, in the capital of Ethiopia. So, and then he even tweeted at some point, he said, this campaign, but this is a law enforcement operation to protect Ethiopian sovereignty. So he tweeted that. I have the tweets for historical record. So how can we trust these people? These are the people who brokered the Pretoria Agreement. We don't expect anything from these people, even their history, their personality, everything, if you will. So that being said, we don't expect a lot from these people, but I think what we can do is we can invite some reputable organizations, international organizations from the West, and some countries, including some Western European countries, including Ireland, for example, was very strong ally of Tigray cause, very genuine, and many Western countries, for that matter. So institutions like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and many organizations were very genuinely concerned about Tigray. They've been doing everything they can until today. So we can, if the Pretoria Agreement is renegotiated and reviewed again, I think we can invite these people or the political class responsible to sign the agreement can invite and make it more practical and enforceable, I guess, using that process. I think the last point Dr. Getachew raised, Ma'ala versus Addis. So obviously, the Addis side, they're very organized. They have resource. They have very skilled people. So sometimes even if I disagree with my enemy, sometimes I learn from my enemy. There are certain things that you can't deny, right? So when Abiy closed 32 diplomatic missions worldwide, many thought he's fool. Why did he close his embassy? Maybe he's desperate. They're not working well, blah blah. But actually, he was smart enough. So he closed all the embassies, and he hired a very reputable lobby public policy advisory lobby firm, the big law firm, and lobby firm and then he's been doing diplomatic lobbying through that organization from DC, right? So basically, everything they do is very based on science and well considered. They consult very respected consultants, and they do things at a very organized and well researched manner. But when it comes to Tigray, I think I don't see like that many skilled people. Even if we have some, we have a lot, of course. Very intelligent people, well, skilled professionals from different sectors worldwide. However, I think the political culture in Tigray doesn't allow that, so they don't listen. I mean, even in our capacity, in our limited resource, we have many respected people in different fields. They give them advice and research and alternative policy memo. They listen to you and then they trash it. They don't implement that. Even regarding Pretoria, many reputable Tigrayans, I can't mention their name, but they did a lot of research, almost a book. They provided that research. They don't listen, so they do things. They basically they decide something behind the door, behind the curtain, and then they just announce. That's the practice for the past many years, unfortunately. So I think I can't compare that, because one of the reasons why we failed is because uh, we do things randomly, so we don't consult and we don't have that much intelligent political figures from our side. So that's why Abiy Ahmed outsmarted and took over everything. So I think we have to admit that, even if it's very inconvenient, the inconvenient truth.
Okay, thank you, Isaias, for that. And I just want to, before going to Takla and Brooke and maybe finalizing, it's hard to not mention the ICRI. So ICRI was established in September 2021, I believe. And the first report came September 22, and its second report came September 2023. So the first report came a couple of months before, almost before Pretoria. So when you look at second report, the analysis from October 3rd, a 9-page analysis, and the final comprehensive report just before its mandate ended, unfortunately, it repeatedly mentions, this report came after Pretoria, and it mentions Pretoria, actually, the cessation of hostilities. So among others, just to show to our viewers, this is from the October 3rd analysis, where they mentioned the government of Ethiopia has so far failed to implement its commitments under the COHA, which is the Pretoria Agreement, in full. In particular, it mentions, a direct quote, on the withdrawal of foreign and non-Ethiopian national defense forces, the return and reintegration of displaced population and refugees, the unhindered humanitarian access, among others. This is a direct quote from the September one, and it talks about the commission found violations by Eritrean soldiers after the COHA, including rape, sexualized enslavement, and other forms of sexual violence, and so on. This is one report. I have a quote from the final report as well, on 84 pages one. It talks about how Tigray, based on the AU monitoring and verification and compliance team confirmation, handed over heavy weaponry, disarmament of some Tigrayan forces, and so on. And on the other hand, it again mentions in this report how after the COHA, still the presence of Eritrean forces and even in terms of the Tigray's grievances in terms of the transitional justice provision and so on. To again maybe look at another by the other report from the September 18. Again, it highlights how the non-Ethiopian National Defense Forces, like Eritrean forces and others, like the Amhara forces, not only are still there, but also committing crimes, including sexual and gender-based violence, and including pushing out. So it says here, because of the presence in Western Tigray and Southern Tigray, they are pushing people and so on. So with that tagline, you can build on what Isaiah said before. How do you see Tigray doing anything, if any, in terms of the way out? When I say Tigray in this case, in a broader sense, not only TPLF or government, but others, as Isaiah was alluding to, Tarlai.
Well, if I could pick Isaias on one of the points he made in terms of who oversaw the Pretoria Agreement, I think principally it was the United States government. I know that the US was happy for the African Union to take the credit, because the African Union, as we all know, are desperate for some sort of credit, because otherwise they don't get any other stuff done, and they want to say that they have silenced the guns, the pathetically stupid term that they like to use. So that is what happened. It was sort of an arrangement, because also the U.S. government has an interest in sort of strengthening the African Union, in their diplomatic fight with China and all that. So there is all that dynamic happening there. And also in terms of the ICRI report, Getachew just mentioned, I think what happened was, of course, they wanted to do more investigation, because they know that the investigation that they had done was nowhere near enough. And they knew that there were more stuff. It was only the tip of the iceberg that they managed to cover. But the political incentives on the part of the AU, of the American government, had changed, and they simply didn't want to extend the mandate. So there was clearly a difference in interest between the ICRI and the UN, and on the one hand, and the EU and the European Union on the other. In terms of what is the exit way for Tigray, I think Brooke raised a very important point earlier, which is that something has to give in Tigray. Unless something fundamental change in Tigray, I can't see how the situation might improve. And one of the things that must change in Tigray very soon is there should be a competent political operation in Tigray. As things stand, everything is dysfunctional. There is nothing that you could point to Tigray that you could say, at the very least, there is that working. There's nothing, but everything has broken down. The divide between the interim administration and the TPLF is widening. It looks like they can't agree on anything. It doesn't even look like they are having serious discussion about what the exit way is. Abstractly speaking, it looks like to me that there are a lot of people who have overstayed their welcome in politics. The usual suspects, the TPLF hardcore, some people might refer them as. I think they are getting in the way. I think they have proven to be a problem for the interim administration to move forward, because they are skeptical about the whole arrangement, it looks like, and that has proven to be a problem. And how Tigray breaks out of that deadlock, I don't know. I don't also know how the opposition parties get into the center stage and play a positive role, because it looks like to me that they don't have a platform from which to affect things one way or the other. But ideally, that is what should happen. A lot of political parties, political personalities should go into decision-making places and affect things from there. But how that happens, I am not a politician, so I don't know. But without bringing about a fundamental change in Tigray, nothing is going to matter. So one of the points, for instance, Isaias raised is that Tigray could actually declare the agreement, the Pretoria Agreement, null and void, and there will be strong grounds to do that because the provisions of the agreement have never been implemented from Abiy's side. So the provision for justice and accountability, the provision for Eritrean troops to withdraw, the provision for Amhara forces to withdraw, the provision for Abiy to provide funding for combat.
I believe you are muted, I guess. I can't hear you. Is this only me or?
I can hear him. He's
can hear
muted.
Do you hear me now?
No, yes.
Okay,
Now you
go.
come.
Yeah.
Do you hear
It's
me
good now. Yeah. Yes.
All right. I don't know. I can't.
You are good now.
We can hear you now. You can speak.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. We can hear you.
All right. I can't hear you, but I'm going to continue then. I was trying to say that there is a lot of reason for the Tigray government to declare the agreement null and void. But if there is no competent political operation in Tigray to secure a better deal in the event that there was a negotiation again, there is no point. And the international community doesn't have any appetite for war and for another round of negotiation. So we Tigray is stuck until the political system in Matalam change. How? Maybe Brooke, maybe Ermias, have ideas, but I don't know how.
Okay, great. Thank you, Taglai, if you are hearing us. So, Brooke, maybe you can focus on the how and your final words for today.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, it's gonna be an opinion. So I don't claim to know it all, but I can throw my 2 cents. Isaias brought a very interesting point, but I really want to challenge him on that. Maybe you can say I want this, I want that, but then what if they say no? Which is exactly what they are doing. We have a lot of things that were supposed to be on, to our benefit, such as the withdrawal of foreign forces, the status quo ante, the withdrawal of non-Ande forces, which is technically Amhara forces from Tigray, and yet they are still there. So you can write whatever you want in an article, you can renegotiate whatever you want, but if there is no a thesis on it to bite, then it's just another ink wasted in a paper. Now the question is, when the war started, how did we actually end up from people who got sidelined, counted out, put in the dark, and yet we managed to be in the negotiating table? That's the key. We have to actually look how we survive the first onslaught to be a formidable contender worthy of a negotiating table. Because for a long time, Abiy regime was actually saying, give me 2 weeks, give me 3 weeks, give me 1 month, give me 3 months. And the whole world was watching for him to eliminate us and then, do whatever he wants, but he can't. And then yet, because of that, there was numerous negotiations. Even at some point, we managed to come all the way to Deborah Burhan, was of course a political flop, but a military victory, a political flop. Because we Tigrayans had one common cause that we were rallying. We were united, actually. United not because of political ideology, but united as a nation. Well, their TPLF and their infinite stupidity, they managed to divide us. Now the diaspora is basically scattered right now. Even if you try to make any kind of demand, we don't have a united force. So at the very least, what I expect is that we gotta have a Tigrayan initiated, not outsider enforced, but a Tigrayan initiated, credible transitional government that all Tigrayans can rally around, so that we can be atomic, united. So when we demand, we're demanding as one people, as one nation, as one government. That way, I'm not saying everything's going to be smooth, but for whatever we do, if we become united for any kind of adversity, we can be ready psychologically, materially, and whatever it takes, because that's how we survived the first 8 months. It wasn't because of TPLF's political wisdom. It wasn't because of TPLF's military preparation that got us there. It was people united for a common cause. Now, TPLF is getting in the way of creating that common cause. Tigrayans need to understand that. The reason why we are stuck in this vicious circle, the reason that we seem not to get out of this rat, is basically because TPLF refused to listen to the opposition, even to their own supporters. As it has mentioned numerous times, we have a lot of brilliant Tagarus who do things voluntarily because that's how actually we get the media coverage. If you guys remember the first 8 months when everything was dark, we only had Twitters and social media, and we managed to get our voice heard. Now, when everything is supposed to be better now, we're all scattered. Everybody's basically losing hope, and we can't even make any difference. Why? Because TPLF really dismantled our unity. I'm saying this because it's true. People might not be comfortable hearing it, but the reason why we are disunited right now is TPLF is ignorant and deaf ear. So the first thing that they could do right now is we need everybody's involvement. We cannot afford to be divided and squander our resources. Opposition parties, civic societies, Tigrayan intellectuals, all should come united and make a one national government that can negotiate for Tigray's interest. From that on, obviously, things are going to be fluid. There's going to be a lot of back and forth discussion, but we are discussing as a one unit. And the little political bickering that they are doing back in Makala, that's despicable, actually. For all the young people who died trying to protect their country, trying to protect their mothers and sisters and their elderly, for TPLF factions to fight against each other is really, really disappointing. So we gotta be united. When we united and when we make all our minds together, something good is gonna come out of it. And then as a nation, we become formidable because the blueprint is already there. It's just, do we have a political willing? Can we set aside our ego and then actually think our better future? This is my opinion. Obviously, some people may disagree, but the political space has to be open for all inclusive, and then let's start from there. That way, when we demand, push comes to shove, we are acting as one unit, as one block, not people who are dispersed and fighting amongst each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Baruch, for that. Isaias, final thoughts?
Thank you. So I think one thing I forgot to mention is why isn't Pretoria a deal implemented, and why is that difficult to make it practical? I think one of the in general terms, one of the reasons is because this document it's not just a legal document; it also is political documents, to political and legal documents. So if there's a political agreement, obviously it requires political will. And that political will comes from the negotiators, right? The brokers, African Union. Of course, African Union doesn't have any power. I agree with stuff like behind the agreement is United States first, obviously, because United States didn't want to get involved directly, so we have to use the African Union to bring the two parties and have them sign the agreement. So the West should have interest to support Tigray. I think that requires political will. That's what I'm saying. That's the reason. And TPLF, obviously, from Tigray side, didn't have anything to sell. They don't have anything to sell, even ideology, right? So you have to have something to sell to the world, right? So that they can side with you. So obviously, TPLF is considered until this day like some communist and very radical and very difficult, in terms of ideology, difficult to work with, and that's just hurting the people of Tigray. Obviously, very clear, and also TPLF doesn't have strong leverage. They're very weak these days, even amongst themselves. They're divided now, so that's just that's on us, on the people of Tigray. We're paying the price. Even we've been paying the price even since 20 or 30 years ago. For one example, very good example is, if you remember, during the Mullis era, he was Mullis and Barakat Simon were mentioned. They used to mention on television the Interhamwe. After the 2005 election, Interhamwe, blah blah. There was a saying like Tigray with a Mekele, Shanta with a Kabali. That was in genocide. That's symbolization is the first stage of genocide. There are 10 stages of genocide, right? So the first one is symbolization, classification, and then implementation, and the denial. The last stage is denial. I didn't kill them. I don't know. So that we've seen that, like in the past 3 years, we've seen the 10th step. I saw them. So and after all that, so TPLF was in power for 30 years, 30 decades. They had the opportunity to do a lot of things, including having Ethiopia sign the International Criminal Court, like the ICC member. Ethiopia should have been a member of the ICC long time ago. So this doesn't require Einstein, right? Very simple. They've been saying Tigray wada Mekele, Shanta wada Kabale, which means there was a preparation to wipe out Tigrayans. That was the first stage of genocide. You don't have to be expert. Very obvious. I was in high school back then, so this isn't right. Something's going to happen in the future. I knew it, even in that mature mentality. But Mullis and some other political figures, they knew it. Mullis was very intelligent. He was a very intelligent person, obviously, but he didn't take action. Ethiopia should have been the member of. Ethiopia should have signed the Rome Statute, which, if you sign the Rome Statute, as you know, the ICC would have jurisdiction to prosecute the crime of genocide, war crime, and crimes against humanity. But they did not. Even though they should have known that there's a potential danger against the Tigrayans, they didn't do it. And then who paid the price? The people. People paid the price. Almost 1 million people wiped out in just 2 years. So, and this is the reason why I agree with what Brooke said. I think we need to have all-inclusive form of political arrangement. So we can't continue like this. We're just suffering. We lost everything. I think they have to come to their sense and make informed decision, I think. And one thing I want to mention about ICRI is I think there's an opportunity to reinstate ICRI, actually, because ICRI is not just about Tigray. I think it's about, in general, the northern atrocity, right, including the Amhara and Tigray and Afar and some other places. So there's active conflict going on in Amhara, and obviously there's war, so civilians are dying. I believe there's drone attack, and many civilians are from Amhara side are dying at this point now. So I think the international community is just eyeing again Ethiopia. So probably there's a chance that the ICRI may be reinstated. I think there has to be some concerted effort. That way ICRI can restart the investigation process in Ethiopia. That way we can take that opportunity to bring justice to our people, I guess. So that being said, I think in this whole scenario, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in my perspective, the good are the innocent people of Tigray who suffered. I think they're the goods, and also friends of Tigray. So in the past 3 years, I've met many people, very interesting people, very loving, caring people. We don't even share, like, in terms of from different races. So like from different races, from different countries, who are like amazing human beings in the past 3 years. So I think these are the good people to me, and the bad are the criminals, the war, obviously, and some international actors who turned a blind eye to our suffering. I think these are the bad. The ugly are the political figures who put us in this situation. The reason why we end up here are the ugly, and their continued failure is also that's the ugly part of this whole process, I guess. I hope I addressed the last question. Did I forget something?
Yeah, you did address that. Thank you, Isaias. In fact, the ICRI, even beyond Afar, Amhara, Tigray, it goes to the rest of Ethiopia.
Yeah, Ethiopia.
And it has an investigation report as part of, what it did in Oromia as well. Tafla is not hearing us, unfortunately, but I think he will read my lips in terms of his final thoughts for the day, and we'll close our show with that. Taglai. Go ahead, Taglai. Oh, now we can't hear you. No. We are hearing him at least, but that's not even working. So thank you, gentlemen, for today's show. Today we discussed a very important topic.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Before closing, you just...
All right, you hear me now, I think.
Yes, go ahead.
All right, I'm not, so I haven't, maybe for the past 10 minutes, I haven't heard anything, so I might repeat
Your
stuff
final
that you
thoughts.
guys have said.
Yeah, final thoughts.
Is that all right?
Go ahead.
What did you say?
So I think I'm going to maybe say a couple of things by way of warning, by way of sort of an appeal to the international community, to the Abiy Ahmed regime, to the Tigray government. I think that's the right thing to do. And I think Brooke mentioned, because the girls have been silenced, as they have been saying, a lot of people have deliberately misled themselves to believe that everything is not all right in Tigray, but nothing is all right in Tigray. As I said in my introduction, people are suffering in IDP. They call them IDP centers, but they are more like concentration camps. People have nowhere to sleep. They're suffering in Madale, in Adiglat, in a lot of makeshift concentration camps. And I think the international community, the Abiy Ahmed regime, the Tigray government should really do their best to help people return to their homes, to Western Tigray, to Southern Tigray, and a lot of other places. And there's a lot of suffering in Tigray. There's a lot of instability. People don't have any hope because Tigray is in some sort of siege. It's not official siege, but it hasn't been lifted either. So there is enormous suffering in Tigray. So I think the international community shouldn't fool itself by saying that because the girls have been silenced, everything is now hunky-dory and people should go about their business. And the Tigray government have a special responsibility to act with their sense of urgency. And the first thing they must do is they must bring about some sort of competent political operation in Matale. They must bring about again, I know that it's naive to beg people to bring about political change. I think the incentive has to come. I think we have to create a situation where if they don't behave in a certain way, they pay a price, one way or the other. And I think we haven't been quite able to create that system. But I think, we have sacrificed 1 million people. And the people who are trying to, engage in some sort of tug of war, international war in Madale, they should really understand that the weight of responsibility that they should have, having sacrificed 1 million people. They should act with a sense of urgency and with a sense of duty and responsibility to make amends for the colossal mistake that they have been making for the past decades, actually. If you take stock of the TPLF's life in political power, it's very difficult to point to one instant where they have acted with a sense of competence. So they have a responsibility more than anybody else to try to right the countless wrongs that they have made in the past. As for the agreement, because we are having this discussion in the context of the Pretoria Agreement, I think it's fair to say that it has been sidelined. And the reason it has been sidelined is because the African Union has neither the interest nor the tools to implement it. And the American government, the EU, must be serious about the agreement if they really want to bring about fundamental change in Ethiopia. And they must push for the provisions of the agreement to be implemented. The withdrawal of Amhara and Eritrean forces from Western Tigray, the provision of other humanitarian services to Tigray, ensuring that there is a semblance of justice and accountability. And those things could only come from the EU and from the American government. The AU, the African Union, could just be forgotten. And that would be my message. Again, I would have repeated a lot of things that Brooke and Isaias would have said, but I had no way of knowing what they have said. So in a way, it's not my fault. It's the fault of the sound system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really hope that the last part was heard well, because I could hear there was some voice issues as well, even when you were talking. But I want to finish it here, and thank you, Isaias Hailemariam, Baruch Radda, and Taklai Gabriel for joining me tonight. And this is a conversation we should have in the future, as well as the suffering of the people continues to be the case. For our viewers, we are keeping showing this map, because this is what really is the visual in terms of where Tigray is right now after Koha, after the Pretoria Agreement. 146 local administrations that are indicated in red here are still under occupation, and that translates into 40% of the land mass, as well as around at least 1.2 million people are still under occupation, despite the fact that the Koha in the Pretoria Agreement was meant to return everything into status quo ante. That was the show for today, and follow us and subscribe, like, share, so that many can view. And in the Horn of Africa, we are under HBS, Horn Broadcasting Services, on satellite, and we get a lot of feedback from Tigray and beyond, and keep doing that. And our email address, as well as our Telegram contact number, is on the screen. Write to us, and we'll publish your thoughts, your ideas, your opinions, and we'll try to also bring issues to the H panel. Gentlemen, from my side, that was the show for today. Good night and good day.
All right, thank you.
Okay, that is the H panel final.